Momodora is a Metroidvania series that I think not enough people talk about, and I'm going to talk about how the Momodora series went from inspiration to evolution. Starting with the first Momodora game, it opens to a scene of walking into a cave and then to a title screen. The story is pretty simple. You have to save your mother from some demon mistress. When looking at the game, it is apparent that the game is largely inspired by Cave Story, from art and even later down the road in gameplay with different weapons. The game has that crude yet charming first game feel, which is not inherently bad, but it also contributes to some obvious flaws. When it comes to the gameplay, you mainly progress through platforming and discovering new areas and fighting enemies, and the combat is even a little unique too. There are different types of weapons that do damage and are better at certain things, but there's also a boomerang to activate switches and shields to block projectiles. It creates an interesting dynamic, especially considering that the controls are very tight. That's another thing about this game, the tightness, portrayed from the jolt of getting hit or the linear movement. The fact it's way too easy to transition between rooms and more. In a way, because of this, it kind of makes the game more skill-based, but it was already quite hard considering the level design. The game, however, makes the player use their arsenal and mechanics in a throw-all-you-got kind of way, which I find interesting. The end of the game features a level with a final boss similar to the Bloodstained Sanctuary in Cave Story. However, unlike the final boss in Cave Story, the boss isn't so much difficult, but rather the sequence of steps having to get to the end. Overall, Momodora 1 is decent with a little bit of identity, but sources a lot from its inspiration. However, Momodora 2 is where the series goes from inspiration to original. Immediately when starting a new save file, the jump in quality is apparent. Although the controls are still not velocitous, they feel better, the sprite work is much better, and the music gains an identity of its own with unique and great composition from Electro Bear. You'll notice familiar enemies like the enemy that throws blocks, or the crush blocks, the rolling enemies, and there are many more enemies with the original designs. You retain your leaf weapon, which is a staple of the series, and you throw these paper bombs as projectiles that are straight out anime. You now stand still while attacking, meaning you can be more vulnerable attacking, meaning you have to identify key moments to attack or to not attack depending on your situation. And this is all just such a great upgrade. Unlike the first Momodora game, which follows an explicitly linear path, Momodora 2 transitions into the Metroidvania genre. But unlike typical Metroidvanias, which usually have pretty big separation between map sections, everything is pretty closely connected, meaning that you do spend less time playing the game, but as a positive, it means traversal between different sections of the game are very smooth and natural. Although there are only, I believe, 3 boss fights, they are still there, and they each feel pretty balanced in their difficulty and position, meaning you can't just meander through the boss fights first time and whatnot. The final boss is the player character from the last game, as it's mentioned that the whole world got reincarnated or something. So overall, Momodora 2 is much better and improves upon the last game majorly, but Momodora 3 takes the originality and makes it even better. Immediately when Momodora 3 starts, it drags the player into this dreamlike tone before placing the character in a vibrantly colored space. Most of the stages beforehand were made of more muted and desaturated colors, but now it's more vibrant. The subpixelation, simple shading, and colors elevate this game's visual style into something truly beautiful. The game also expands upon its effects, including rotation, opacity, and more, and it all just looks great. There are now a few new characters you can talk to, and they feel iconic in the world that's set in place. Everything feels much more fluid, with velocity finally being placed in the physics. Everything is just better. The music, instead of being dark and adventurous, becomes much more defined and ambient. There's one track reused, which is the boss theme from Momodora 2, but I like that track, it really fits. There are more bosses now, and even a little variety in the combat. There's also a secret boss which seems to be a recurring element from this game forward, called Hagok, and when you enter, it feels important and foreboding, as if some big event is about to happen. It's honestly better than the final boss of this game. Although that's not to say the final boss is bad, it's also pretty fun with its 3 phases and all, but it's just something to mention. And that's the Momodora series, from the first game to the third. I am aware that there is Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, but that's where the game changes drastically from the first, and I believe that it's not chronological. There's also a new Momodora game, and when that comes out, I will be sure to cover it, as it seems like it's going to be the best one out of this series.